Jim from the Cult of Cornette Facebook group. This was sent in by Dave Massino. Who are Jim's top 5 wrestlers over 350 pounds?
Oh, good Lord. Well, we've just talked about Yokozuna here recently, and even if he, wasn't as agile as Bam Bam Bigelow, he was twice as heavy at one point. I mean, Yoko definitely would have to be one of the top super heavyweight guys in the history of the business. And I just mentioned another one, Bigelow, but they're Crusher Blackwell. I mean, when you talk about over 350-pound wrestlers, you're including Andre and Big Show. But are they really, do you go with the heavy wrestler or the tall wrestler who's also heavy? Brown Strongman is billed at over 350 pounds, but does anybody look at him like the gimmick of a King Kong Bundy or a Crusher Blackwell or, somebody like that? And, Matt Morgan at one point was closing in on 350 when he was bodybuilding and, muscle building, but he was also almost 7 feet tall. So that doesn't put him in the same body type as a Bronson Reed. So I think if you're looking for big guys instead of tall guys, I think Yoko, Bigelow, Blackwell. Who am I fucking missing? I've just named
Vader.
A couple more. Vader, obviously. Vader, who went anywhere from 370 to 420, but was still only about 6'3". So, the WWF or WWE got most of those guys because that was Vince's wheelhouse or flywheel or whatever the fuck. So when you talk about Vader and Yoko and Bam Bam, and that Boss Man.
Yeah.
Boss Man, depending on time of the year, he was above or below 350 for a lot of time.
John Tenta.
So, Earthquake, and not necessarily the Earthquake that you saw in 1995 in the WWF doing sumo matches with Yoko, but Earthquake John Tenta in Japan in his younger days, because of the size, his body broke down a little more quickly. But what a fucking athlete he was in his younger days. So, I mean, you'd have to sit down and make out a list. And then if we're talking all time, I'm sure Martin the Blimp Levy was the drizzling shits to watch, but he drew a lot of money because there was nobody like him then.
Haystack Calhoun, same thing. Everyone knew that name.
Yes, he was legitimately one of the wrestlers in the late 50s, early 60s, because of especially the TV that he was on in the Northeast, that if you went to a store or a shopping center someplace and yelled out Haystacks Calhoun, people would know that name even if they didn't watch wrestling because it just stood out. And everybody said this. He was one of the worst workers in the business. And I've seen some film when he was in his heyday in the early 60s, and it was fucking rotten. But it was a simpler time, and nobody was that big, and people bought the horseshoe and the gimmick.
And at least it wasn't Happy Humphrey.
And at least it wasn't Happy Humphrey, because as bad as Haystacks Calhoun was, he wasn't nearly as bad as Happy Humphrey. And Calhoun had 2 or 3 things he could do. He could take a bump through the ropes to the floor that looked, and he was the shape of a beach ball. They said 601. He was legitimately 500, I'm sure, at some point in his career. But he could take a bump through the ropes that looked like it was accidental. He didn't mean to do it, and it fucked him up when he landed. And that's the way he'd lose a lot of his matches. And he could do a couple of other things, but punches and any kind of work, and he had no stamina. They were all the shits. But the name, the gimmick, the horseshoe, and the size, that's what worked.
Over 350 pounds, is there anyone you could think of? Who's the best big man in the history of Memphis? Or the Memphis promotion, Nashville promotion?
Well, see, once again, for years it would have been Plowboy Frazier, and my God, he could do the best leg drop of anybody that size I've ever seen, and otherwise than that, he was the shits. All the big guys had one or two things they could do. I'm trying to think of Memphis didn't usually use a lot of guys that big on a regular basis because one, most of the guys were smaller and it would make them look visually even smaller and the big guys couldn't keep up with the action. But if they did get a big guy, they would use him as a monster and build a gimmick and build the card around him. They wouldn't just a lot of time put him on the fucking show. They would make something out of him, and then he'd be gone fairly quickly because he wouldn't be able to last.
We probably should have put Andre on our list.
Well, remember I mentioned Andre when I was talking about, are we talking about the tall guys?
Yeah, that's true.
That have to weigh that much, or are we talking about the guys that are just like the Bronson Reed of today or the Bam Bam Bigelow of 20 years ago, is that they're just unnaturally large?
Who would you prefer, Bigelow or Vader?
You know, personally or
You're the booker, you're the promoter. You need to have one big guy on the card.
Bam Bam was more fun to be around in the locker room. Leon was probably, Bam Bam was a more agile athlete. Leon was even bigger and heavier and could portray that he was hitting harder, better. Bam Bam was a better worker. Leon was a more fearsome monster. Bam Bam was probably a more flexible, but at the same time, Leon just had that aura about him of violence that Bam Bam, in real life, Bam Bam was probably as bad, if not a badder ass than Leon in terms of if you got in a street fight. But Leon portrayed more violence, I think. And remember, Bam Bam's original gimmick, the way he looked in Memphis when he made his debut and the first, little while he was in the business, was not a superhero full body outfit with flames on it. It was jeans and he looked like a fucking street gang member at 400 pounds with tattoos on his fucking head. So if you'd have followed that, and if he'd have been more established as just a fucking violent convict looking motherfucker like that, then that look would have probably been better for him, I thought, all around than when he got to Vince real early and got superheroed up. And then you've got a guy with the flames tattooed over his whole bald head, 400 pounds that can do cartwheels and drop kicks, but he's dressed like a superhero, and now he's teaming with Doink the Clown. Took some of the edge off of it.
Should they have made him an arsonist?
Oh, come on now.
I actually like the full body outfit with the flames. I actually think that's kind of an iconic look, and it worked for him.
Yeah, but at the same point, he was another guy who, if he'd have gone in the opposite direction, I could have seen Bam Bam working with fucking anybody in the NWA, working with Flair for the title as a babyface, or working against Dusty as a heel, as a monster heel like Big Bubba Rogers. With the real life violence that was some part of Bam Bam's life was never brought out to make him any more fearsome than his size already made him. He could have been a lot scarier motherfucker if you'd have concentrated on the scary things about him in real life.
Do you think Vader could have gotten a match out of Lawrence Taylor that Bam Bam did?
No, Vader would have. It either would have stunk or Vader would have just fucking stiffed him until Taylor just fucking curled up in a ball. But Leon was not the kind of worker that could do the things necessary to get a match like that out of a complete novice. Bam Bam was.
So once again, you're the promoter, you're the booker, you need one big guy on your show, I guess one agile big man. Who do you pick, Vader or Bam Bam?
What year is it?
1993.
Vader.
1988.
Bam Bam.
1990.
Yeah, we might have to flip a coin.
Okay, all right.